Should we proceed with this case? Should we settle? And if so, what is a reasonable settlement amount? These are standard questions in most disputes, and exactly the questions Epirote is designed to answer. In this video tutorial, we're going to have a look at one of our example cases in our platform. Now, this case revolves around the type of disputes that's been analyzed several times in the tool: the M&A transaction gone wrong. In this based on a true story case, the acquiring party in a transaction is not at all happy with the state of affairs in a company that they acquired. Several deals were lost as the target company completely failed to achieve the required certifications needed to operate in some markets. Although the target company is still operating and generating revenue, the buyer is contemplating legal actions against the seller. The buyer is of the opinion that the seller knowingly withheld information regarding the risks involved. Now, this would constitute fraud, or at least an incorrect representation in the warranties provided in the share purchase agreement. As a legal advisor, we're asked to look into the case. Should we proceed with actions against the seller? Is this claim a potential asset, or is it in reality a liability and best left alone? Like all legal disputes, the legal arguments are not obvious or clear. They contain detours and dead ends. But even the most complex disputes can be boiled down to the following questions. Will we win or lose on the main issues, basically liability? And then how much would we win or lose, quantum? And then what will this cost us? Now, these are difficult questions to answer in almost every case, but let's not shy away from that and face it head on. Of course, other values connected to a case can also be quantified and included, but let's keep this simple. So in this case, our projections show that the false information caused the buyer a loss of 50 million in revenue. Now, this is naturally what we would like the seller to pay us. So we enter information about the potential proceedings and then start to model our claim. We start by creating a node asking a question that the tribunal would first be tasked with answering. So we ask, will the tribunal find that the seller has provided fraudulent misstatement in their warranties? So in the share purchase agreement, that is. Naturally, we cannot know this for sure, but we have to make some form of assessment. So we start with our best guess with the information available. Gut feeling, some might say, but gut feeling from an experienced lawyer is most times the best information available in complex disputes. If data is available on similar cases, this can of course be weighted into the assessment. So from our experience, we know that in general, it's hard to prove that a seller has actively provided false information. Some emails and reports do point to this, but the baseline probability for establishing fraud is low. So our best guess here is a 30-70 scenario. Now, this is not written in stone. We can go back and adjust this later to highlight and even build upon this uncertainty. So in the decision tree model, we've modeled a path that would lead to liability. But what comes next? Well, the buyer would need to convince the tribunal of the size of damages. And how would the tribunal assess that? Information from the business side here shows that if the information had been correct, the acquisition would have resulted in additional revenue of roughly 50 million. So after discussing with an expert, we believe that we could establish that the loss would be almost this number, say 45 million, using a discounted cash flow projection. In this position, since we've established fraud, the limitation of liabilities set out in the purchase agreement would not be applicable. Another expert looking at the numbers provided a more careful estimate close to 34 million. And the same experts, having looked at the financial records of the target company, also create a summary detailing the loss of value based on the write-down of assets in the company. According to this, by looking at the balance sheet, the loss would be around 22 or 15 million, depending on which expert you would ask. Although all of these versions are potential outcomes, our experience tells us that establishing a credible model around discounted cash flow projections is difficult. Our best guess is that the tribunal in general would tend to lean towards more modest damage numbers when given the options. So based on this, we weigh the potential outcomes 30-70 towards the balance sheet model and 40-60 on the size of damages. Already we've established a path to full success, and it's clear that this might be difficult, but there are also other outcomes here where a large amount would be awarded to the buyer. But our assessment doesn't end here. Regular misrepresentations made in the purchase agreement would also lead to the seller being held liable. So we go back and ask, will the tribunal find that there was a misstatement in respect of warranty item 2.4, which would be the relevant warranty item in the agreement? On this topic, we feel that the evidence available points quite strongly towards the seller's representations containing serious flaws. At least more likely a yes than a no is what we believe. So we say 60-40. If we get to yes, the same question regarding methods for calculating damages would be repeated. So we duplicate what we built before, but in this outcome, the limitation of liability cap of 25 million would apply. So if the tribunal would accept the model around the discounted cash flow, that would be capped at 25 million. Finally, we ask, if we cannot prove misrepresentation in this item, perhaps a breach of another warranty item can lead to the same result. Having already lost the first two, we know that the chances would be lower here, so we give it a 30-70%. The damages modeling would, however, be the same as before. So we made a rough model of the case, and we can see that the probability weighted value of the claim itself is roughly 17 million. And we can play around with our claim model to see how the value is affected if we are more or less optimistic. Naturally, this model is only as good as the input provided. It contains uncertainties. But in all cases, we can only work with the information we have available now. Some lawyers find this a bit daunting and always strive for certainty. But from a business perspective, dealing with an uncertain future is what the job is about. So in short, we could win this claim, but at least with the current knowledge, we cannot rule out the risk of losing, and there are a lot of outcomes in between a full win and a full loss. But this is not the full picture. We have to look at what it would cost us, what the risk would be, if we pursue this claim. And our experience here tells us that a case like this, it could cost around 3 million for our legal cost and the cost for the proceedings. And most likely the same size of the cost for the other party. After that, we ask, what will happen with the legal fees after the dispute? In this case, we would perhaps expect that we get a portion of this back if we win fully or almost fully. But if we'd only receive a small or lower amount from what we claimed, we would expect that the tribunal would say that each party would carry their own costs. And if we lost his case, we would expect that we would have to pay most of the cost for the opposing side as well. Now that we've factored in the legal cost and the potential recovery of the legal cost, we analyze the case. And we can see that we have an average value of closer to 14 million. And even though we have a decent case, it would be a risk-neutral decision to accept a settlement of 14 million. We could perhaps get more, but we could also end up with nothing and legal costs for the proceedings. But we left something out. So we go back and add that the claim is coupled with interest. And this brings the case value up to roughly 18 million. We will have to revisit this assessment later, but we have enough to get an overview of our position. Overall, in this case, we can see an average value of the case, and we can start to manage expectations around the overall value of this dispute. Although it will prove difficult to get the full amount, we can see that the upside in this case is still a lot larger than the potential downside. So from a financial perspective, it would make sense to move forward as long as we can live with the risk of losing this case. But we're after more than that. We want to understand the case from the perspective of the seller. So we remodel the case from their perspective. So what we do here is make a copy of the assessment we just made. We swap the position of the parties, and we reverse the values in the claim, as these are now negative values for the defendant. The actual value of the claim remains the same, but now negative. We also reverse the recoverability of legal costs. And now we're viewing the case from the perspective of the other party. Naturally, they refute the claim. But if they have access to the same material and have the same understanding of the case, an assessment from their side would show an average liability of around negative 24 million. And this is because they have no upside, only a financial downside. So even though our value is around 18 million, and that a settlement amount above this value would be a risk-neutral choice, from a strategic perspective, we should of course aim for an amount as high as possible, and closer to the liability risk for the other party. So this assessment shows that a settlement around the range from 18 to 24 million would be beneficial for both the seller and the buyer in order for them to avoid costly loss. This overlapping area of the case value for the claimant and the defendant is sometimes known as the zone of potential agreement. To understand the overall value of a case, one needs to hold both the upside and the downside in one hand. Viewing the outcome of the case like this makes it easier to manage expectation for what could be a reasonable settlement. Now, we and all stakeholders in this dispute have a clear understanding of the picture, the overall picture of this dispute, and that is exactly how you rely on decision analysis and our tool. I hope this video gave you a better understanding around the use of Aperoto, and as always, don't hesitate to get in touch if you'd like to discuss how to best model and analyze your dispute. Thank you.